Ever since the 1950s, and perhaps before, scientists have been warning that our way of life was threatening the future of the planet itself. In the late 1970s, it looked briefly as though the world might do something about it. Then Ronald Reagan became president in the United States and the moment passed. It's always seemed like something that would happen in the distant future, 2030, 2050, 2100. In fact, of course, it's already started, rather frighteningly so. The BBC Europe correspondent Nick Beak has been to Svalbard in the Norwegian Arctic, where global warming is happening faster than anywhere else on Earth.
This place serves as a warning as to what climate change is doing to our planet, and here everything is underlined. It's so clear to see. So when we went out, we saw polar bears from our boat, and there the ice is diminishing, and so it's harder for the polar bears to find seals. And so instead the locals were telling us how some of the polar bears were venturing into the main settlement. They were coming into town more and more to try and find reindeer. That's an animal that normally they wouldn't be eating. But also the people that live there too, they're under threat like never before. Literally the ground beneath their feet is melting away, and that's because of our warming planet. The risk of avalanche and landslide has increased, and so people are having to move their homes, and it is a really precarious future.
And the warming effect is happening much faster there, isn't it, than in other places?
Absolutely, 6 times more in Svalbard than the global average, and this is of real concern to the scientists who've been studying this place for years now. There's a number of factors behind it, the main one being that with all the ice that disappears, it means there's less white stuff to reflect the heat, and of course the more exposed ocean absorbs that heat, and so it's a vicious circle really, and the level of warming is very alarming to the scientists we talked to who have looked over 50 years at what's been happening. They say that maybe a 4-degree rise is what they're looking at in this place, and the reason they're concerned is because they say what happens in the Arctic is a sign of things to come. So all the melting of the ice there will affect sea levels in the future, so whether that's Bangladesh, other parts of the world.
So all the time that people have been debating whether it really is happening, it always seems to be off in the future somehow. Actually, it's happening really badly right where you were.
It is, and you can see it with your own eyes because the glaciers there, they are diminishing at a really fast rate. So it is a really troubling time for scientists who quite often try and talk in sober terms. They say what's happening here is a real alarm call and people should be listening to it.
Did you go there really wanting to change people's minds about things?
We went there, John, because we thought that there were solutions being worked on which may be able to be adopted in other parts of the world. We'd heard quite a lot about how they were trying to move to a carbon-free future, but I think when we got there we were slightly disappointed, to be honest, because what we found was the final mine that was on Svalbard, and this was a community that for the last 100 years has really been built on mining. The final mine was about to close, but a couple of weeks later it turns out that the mining company has actually done a U-turn. Why is this? Well, they say that the global dynamics, the energy crisis in Europe means that it's profitable for them to keep this mine open. And so we're thinking to ourselves, if the fastest warming place on Earth can't get rid of fossil fuels completely, what hope for the rest of us? Climate campaigners are worried that these really tough decisions will be kicked into the long grass, or certainly not taken soon enough if we are, as a humanity, to try and stop the rate of global warming.
So there is kind of knock-on effect from the Ukraine war then?
Cooperation between Russian scientists and Western scientists has been suspended, and that is of concern to the experts from the Polar Institute and other big organisations, because they say this exchange of information is vital on a day-to-day basis and also in the long term, because together they can work on why things are happening in the Arctic. And one top scientist was saying to me, if you think about it, half of the Arctic coastline is Russian, and so despite the politics, they would hope that the cooperation can continue in the future.
What sort of temperatures were you working in?
pretty warm ones, John, and I think that's a concern. More people are seeing this for themselves, because this is another aspect to all of this. Tourism in Svalbard has increased. Tens of thousands of people visiting every year. That adds pressure to an already fragile landscape, and so there they've got quite a difficult balancing act, because they want people to see what they're experiencing, how nature is changing, but also they've got to think about the damage being done by the planes coming in every day, also the ships arriving, bringing hundreds of people spending time on this archipelago. They drive around, of course, as well, and so if you look at the carbon footprint per person, it's pretty high. So lots of difficult decisions to be made.
Nick Beak, just back from the Arctic.